So, you've walked into the 4th chapter of John, and a lot of you are familiar with the 4th chapter of John, in particular, this lady, right here, who has dropped her water jug and is running back into town to do what? To tell everybody that she met this guy that knew all about her. Could he be the Messiah? Right. We're going to back up just a touch and get a running start out of it because we had over a month off.
It'd be interesting if, I like the way you said this guy, because if she introduced him as a Jew, would
Yeah.
other people come out to see him?
Right. Thank you, David.
Oh.
See, that's what I'm talking about right there. There's the solution part of David. That's what I'm talking about. See, seeing things in the text that we're just not paying that much attention to. Okay? Little things and big things. And sometimes the little things are bigger things than we give them credit for.
But she
Okay.
didn't call him a guy, she called him a man.
She was a little more respectful than Bruce.
I'm not sure guy was even in the vernacular.
Well, yeah, that's funny. Let me just say one sentence about that. They have their own vernacular. Okay. In fact, we even touched on it a time or two in the previous sessions. That was more than one sentence already, sorry. Where they actually, people actually are using what would have been vernacular in their time in that language, in Aramaic or Greek, that meant something to them a little different than we're reading in the translation in English. Okay? Like when Jesus calls Mary woman.
Instead of mother.
Instead of mom, mother, etc. We read that and we think because of our Western 2025 now mind, in English language and Western culture, we think, man, that's really kind of disrespectful, Jesus. But actually it was not in their vernacular and in their time. Right? So, anyway, we're going to back up and take a running start into this before the big question is coming. The big moment is coming that we actually left as a cliffhanger in the end of November. And everybody went, oh. So, he and the disciples are exiting Judea and going north to Galilee, which is taking them directly up through Samaria. Samaria is a verboten place and people for the Jews. They're going to make their journey through there just expeditiously. Anytime they're going north to south, south to north. The disciples go into town to try to find some food. Just buy some food and bring it back out. Come on in. Come on in.
You got lost?
Are you in the right place?
Yeah.
Well, yeah, and then my apologies to everybody, especially if you're new.
I am.
The there's a
On the last page.
introduction notes there to your left, and yeah, you go to the
Email,
second
if you want to
page.
get his emails.
Sorry.
It didn't even get removed from like even that. I don't think. Oh, the list it says fireside.
Well, light a fire.
Yeah.
We were assigned the fireside room at the beginning of the fall quarter.
Yeah.
And it never got taken off of some of the entries in the system. And so I had conversations about that already this week in emails and stuff with people. Still it gets printed up. But some of you got my email yesterday saying, hey, it's not the fireside. Anyway. Now, where was I?
Yeah.
The Samaritans.
The Samaritans, thank you. Thank you. See, Sue's, it's good to have Sue here, isn't it? She's a gem. No, she is. So, the Samaritans were considered half-breeds by the Jews at large. They were considered not actually to be true Jews.
Lower class.
They were considered to be more than a lower class. Unclean. Thank you, Sue. You weren't even here when we talked about it. Unclean.
I don't remember why that is.
Because they were heretics. They did not believe in God, and they were perverting.
They didn't believe in God?
No, I'm talking about from the Jewish standpoint.
Oh.
They didn't
Right.
believe in their way of God.
Exactly. They had a totally, and they did. They had a different theology about God. But they also shared a lot of the historical stuff the Jews did, but they blended it with other things that were locally based and also ethnically based, because they intermarried when they came back from Babylon, Persia, and they were intermarrying in that area. But that area originally, before the Babylonian exile, was a part of Israel. And so that remnant of that tribe or two that occupied that space, they came back from Persia and settled down back there, but they disconnected themselves by intermarrying and kind of blending. And this isn't the only time that happens in history either. It happens in the Christian church as well in the past 2,000 years.
Intermarrying outside of the Jewish heritage.
Yes, ethnically and religiously. And so they're pulling religious stuff from the people that are intermarrying with, which was happening before the exile to Babylon, right? Also part of the problem, and so forth. So you have this, they literally, the Jews in Judea and Galilee and elsewhere, considered this group of people to be actually literally unclean from a religious standpoint, which meant that from an unclean standpoint, according to the Torah,
It's right up there touching something that's dead and something that has a terminal illness.
all of the things in the Torah law lists of codes, right, about what was considered unclean and how you handled it. So Jesus, and a lot of times, by the way, they would just go over and travel along the river, or even on the opposite side of the river, just to avoid this area, to get from one point to another.
It wasn't hostile, it was just unwelcomed.
It was unwelcome. But you notice that what we don't see is we don't see out of her, since we're in this story about specific Samaritan person, we don't see out of her a contempt for him.
A surprise.
A surprise out of her,
Yes.
but no contempt for her, right? And it's interesting because if you go to a different gospel where there's recorded this story that we call the Good Samaritan, right? Jesus is intentionally in that story saying there was a Jew that was traveling on this road, and he gets hit by some highway robbers and left for dead in a ditch. And two Jewish religious people walk by. They see him and they walk by.
They cross the road to
Yeah,
pass.
yeah, they walked on the other side of the road like he's unclean.
But, you know, she might not feel that contempt for him because it might be a gender thing. I mean, the way women treated men, regardless of
Hold on to
whether they're
that.
clean or
Yeah,
unclean.
yeah, hold on to that because we're gonna unpack all these different aspects of her
That's why it takes us so
as
long.
well as him and what's going on here in this interaction, right? Because that's a real thing. That's a real thing too. Good. So there was no contempt on the part of this Samaritan guy that's the third person that walks by down the road and sees this Jewish guy just left for dead in a ditch. Not only is there not contempt, it's a fictitious guy, but he's still intentionally using a Samaritan guy as his model. Jesus is intentionally using a Samaritan person to be the hero of the story. Not only is there not any contempt on the part of the Samaritan person when he sees the poor Jewish slub here in the ditch that's been left for dead. He could have just as easily walked right by also because, hey, he's a Jew. Why should I save him? Why should I? I got no dog in this fight. I got no money in this game, no skin in this game. He kind of deserves it. Is that a real human thing?
Yes.
Yeah, it really is.
Yeah.
It is really a real human thing. We see it now.
Thank goodness that's not me over there.
Right,
Yeah.
right. And so it's a real thing. But Jesus paints this Samaritan guy like maybe this was kind of a common thing in their relationships with each other, that the Jews hated the Samaritans, but the Samaritans,
That's why the apostles could go down to the town and get some food.
Dude.
They were not rejected to do that.
that means right.
Well, was there,
When you hear me say dude, that means good.
you know, they lived in the same area, they probably wore similar clothes, I mean, they wouldn't have gone, they wouldn't walk around with Stamp of David on it, you know, or whatever. So they might not have known who was the Samaritan, who was the Jew.
Looks like
Possibly.
Connor.
Possibly. Okay, so let's hang on to that. Okay, because I like that. This, you know, we're pulling what's not spoken out loud and how it works itself out possibly, right, into the text.
But this woman knew that Jesus was a Jew,
Correct.
and he asked her for water. She goes,
Yes.
I'm a Samaritan woman, and you're a Jew, and you're asking me for water, so she knew he was.
As
Okay.
isolated as they were, their accents and
Yeah,
everything were probably a little
yeah.
different.
They were.
Their dress.
Because- okay, so let's talk about that just a second. So she doesn't say anything to him until he says something.
Right.
So maybe his dress was or was not indicative strongly of him being a Jew. But once he opened his mouth,
Yeah, but it does say that she said, you are a Jew and I am a Samaritan woman.
But he'd already
How
talked
can you
to her.
ask me
He'd
for a
already
drink?
talked to her.
right, but not until he had opened his mouth.
Yeah,
See, because we actually literally see in the New Testament other places that people who were from Judea would say, hey, you're from Galilee, after they started talking.
Yeah, yeah.
There was literally a
Recognized.
distinctive vernacular and accents and stuff that were separate from each other. In fact, so much so that if you go to the early books of Acts, in the second chapter of Acts, when we have the Pentecost event and everything, the writer fleshes out how many different kinds of people were there in Jerusalem when this happened. And one of the people groups that were hearing all of this being preached by Peter, one of the people groups is listed Judeans. Well, they're in Judea. Of course they are. Well, one of the reasons why they specify it was Judeans, was this also is mentioned in the same chapter, is that are not all these men that are speaking here, not all these 12 guys, aren't they Galileans? How did they know? There's 1 million people in that city. How did they know? Peter was talking. Peter's talking.
Maybe they're all talking.
They were all,
So they
ultimately.
could all, they could.
Because they all had the same gift bestowed on them at the same time, right? And were preaching the good news of Jesus, right? In foreign languages, right? But Peter's up, and now he's speaking in probably Aramaic, in a Galilean form. So it's obvious. And by the way, Judas was the only non-Galilean disciple. And where was he? Are not all these men Galileans? Why, yes, you're right, they are all Galileans. You know? So there was evidential things because of culture and linguistics and everything like that, that you could tell. We can tell when somebody's from Arkansas
You're right.
Or Texas?
or Texas, but you know, I wasn't gonna say
New
that.
England,
Or England,
New England.
or New England too, right?
Hawk.
Brooklyn,
I'm gonna leave some Mary stories alone.
Jersey.
Boise.
So is that pretty brave of her
Oh, thank
to,
you, Sue.
I love that she's being out front there,
Okay.
but is
okay.
that pretty brave for her for being a woman because of the man-woman relationship back then? Or
At what
is the
point?
Samaritans?
At what point? From the very beginning? Just answering
He
it?
just says, give me a drink of water.
Yes.
She could have easily gotten the
Yes.
drink of water, given it to him.
Yes.
And that would have been the end of it.
Okay, let's sit on that for a second, because we're gonna back up and see what we've just basically talked about. When the Samaritan woman came to draw water, Jesus said to her, "Will you give me a drink?"
Oh, mine just says, give me a drink.
Yeah, listen, anyway.
Belly up to the bar.
Well, and that's more literal, because that's literally what the
Yeah.
Greek is just simply saying,
Yeah.
okay? But, you know, you're fleshing out in English vernacular, so. Give me a drink. His disciples had gone into town to buy food. Okay, so he's all by himself. And by the way, on purpose.
And she's at a odd period of day to be out there.
We're gonna talk about that in a minute too.
Mine.
Because
What?
literal,
Doesn't want to talk about nothing.
we're gonna get to it. We're gonna get to it. Actually, let's talk about that a second.
Yeah.
Okay, because like if we'd have gone 2 years ago, when I've been doing all this, rolling around in John, I was of the same impression based on a lot of church history and writings and stuff that we've arrived at and had in my notations of what I was learning about her originally, like 2 or 3 years ago, as what probably most people in this room already think of her as being a woman of ill repute. Am I the only one in this room that's ever heard her referred to as a woman of ill repute?
No.
But it isn't necessarily so.
Well, she's
You are
living
not
with
the
a
only
man that
one.
she's not married with, that's taboo. But
Is it? Okay, so we're gonna talk about that. Because, okay, this goes way back too. I mean, there was people in early church history, from a leadership standpoint, that were kind of inferring it, but really, who really punched it was Pope Gregory and something that he wrote about her. And that, you know, obviously, all these little indicators in here, she's had 5 husbands and she's living with the guy now. She's showing up for water in the middle of the day because because everybody else is not, the other women in the town are not. Does that mean anything? Does it actually mean that none of the other women are not in the middle of the day going to the well, or anybody else? See, we're reading things into the text in order to flesh her out better,
so she
right?
could either be ashamed of all the other people that
She could.
are, more righteous and pillars of the society,
Mhm.
or she may be shunned because of who she is.
She might be. If she was a woman of ill repute,
Or all the
then,
above.
yeah.
There's
So,
also,
and
there's
so-
also the Jewish custom of if a man dies without producing an offspring, his brother takes her for a wife. So there's that other
Oh.
possibility of her, all these
Oh,
other husbands
see.
being brothers.
Okay. How do you like that?
I mean, it's just a possibility.
Okay, so, okay, no, not just a possibility. I mean, how, so I'm gonna pull more from more scholastic,
Practice that.
more scholarly writings about this situation about the marriages, right? Because there's a lot of scholars that have spent a lot of time with this text and with the historic first century and historic Jewish culture and Torah and all this kind of stuff, to explain why would she have 5 husbands? And remember, she's responding to a request on his part, which was what?
Give me a drink.
Oh, the second request.
Call your husband and
Call
come
your
back.
husband.
Call your husband, go into town and call your husband and come back. Well, number one, pretend you're her. Okay, besides the fact that she doesn't have a husband. Okay, pretend you're here. Why? I mean, it's funny you read this text and you go right through it without asking, why?
Well.
Why do you care? I'm just here to get my water.
So you said that there's intermarriage, and it could have just been him, maybe interested in her, and she's like, what? Why would you be interested in me?
For what reason? Yeah,
Do you have a husband?
right,
That's a one-liner.
right, yeah, yeah. See, again, why?
Why?
Why do you want to know that?
Because it's a
Well, it's
divine.
What's your
Well, she doesn't know that though, right? She
Not
doesn't
yet,
know that.
not
Yeah,
yet.
not yet.
What about the potential that men and women, I mean, women were second-class citizens, so.
Yes.
He's a man, he wants to talk to a man, not a woman. Like, go bring your husband.
It wouldn't be an odd question, in a way. It would be an odd question depending on her situation specifically. If she is a woman of ill repute. Knock it off. For the peanut gallery.
You only have to put up with him this week and then stop.
No, that's too bad.
He still has to put up with me.
That's too bad. So,
But Jesus knew all of this already.
well, this is the funnest part about this story, though. But it's funner when you're being fair to the text.
Yeah, being in the moment.
With her, who she actually is.
Yeah.
Because that's what Jesus is seeing, is who she actually is. Am I right? And he's throwing it back at her. He's a total stranger. Not only is he a stranger, he's Jewish. Not only is he a stranger, he's a man talking to a woman, all by their lonesomes,
Uh-huh.
asking to get a drink from him.
Associating.
Not only associating, give me a drink, which means that you're going to be interacting physically with those unclean Samaritan germs,
Yeah.
literally, right? This is all weird. This is all weird. In fact, when we come to where the disciples come back, you're going to see the weird.
So Bruce, it's an unclean well to begin with. Think about it.
Pardon me?
It's an unclean well. I mean, it's a well for
That's
Samaritan.
exactly right.
Not for
That's
Jews. It's like, I
exactly
can't
right.
drink from this,
is
I'm
not-
Jewish.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
hasn't Father Jacob
Yeah.
given him the
Yeah.
well?
Yeah.
Well, but the
Yeah.
disciples were buying food from them that they were eating.
Say again, Mark?
But the disciples were buying food in a Samaritan town.
That's also correct.
Which would have been unclean too.
That's also correct. Yeah. So there's a very weird relationship that happens between Jews and Samaritans. Okay.
He doesn't,
So it's going to boil down
he
to.
doesn't ask her to go get her husband until she says, give me the water that will.
Yeah.
I will
let
live."
him want.
Yeah.
Because
Yeah.
they had a dialogue,
Okay.
and then he said, go bring your
Okay.
husband.
Okay, so let's go right there, okay, because that's literally where we're at on the screen, okay? Because this is really important. We already covered it a little bit in the last episode, but let's back up for everybody's sake. You're a Jew, and I'm a Samaritan woman, not a Samaritan, a Samaritan woman. How can you ask me for a drink? Because she understands that this is not what Jews do.
Right.
And there it is, out of her own mouth, out in the open. Before she said, oh yeah, sure, no problem. I'd be happy to help you. How are you asking me that? Because she knows that this is not something they do. That's not even something that they would believe is okay. For religious reasons. would not be okay. Not just because they just harbor a grudge against each other, they've painted it in God, right? How are you doing that? How are you doing this? So she asked that question. Jesus' answer.
This note says that Jews do not use dishes Samaritans abuse.
Right. That's right. In fact, I think if you look right there,
Yeah.
Jesus answers her question with another. Thank you, Linda, because this is what we're going to talk about a little bit this morning before we get too far in this. This is really one of the things I want to punch this morning. And it's been on my mind the past week or two, literally. While we've been off, it occurred to me that one of the things that I said at the very beginning of the course was what this course is going to be about was how Jesus tells everybody that he is God, right? Which means, as far as they're concerned, the main audience of who's offended about it calls it what? Blasphemy. That's why we have the gospel of blasphemy over here, because Jesus is blaspheming. Blaspheming?
Yeah.
Oh, yeah, no. Okay, thank you.
Either way.
The other one's
What'd you
hard to
major
say.
in?
Huh?
What'd you major in?
Economics.
Oh,
Not applicable.
someday we'll put you into that.
Yes.
David.
Well, the other word is just harder to say. Blaspheming is easy to say.
Yeah, exactly. So, but he's not blaspheming, but he's also, see, it was brought to my attention by something I read this past week or so that, and it's correct, I haven't done a good enough job of presenting it, but this is a good opportunity. Puzzle. See, rabbinic traditions, from a teaching standpoint, really were very riddle-based and insinuated and all this kind of stuff. And we've already seen in the previous sessions how when, see, John, when he's in the prologue, he starts out talking, it's obvious.
Yeah.
It's obvious that in retrospect, decades later, John is writing a creation story at the beginning of the first
Sounds like the
chapter.
First
Mhm.
chapter.
And it is boom.
Yeah.
The Word was God. And he became flesh. And he tabernacled with us.
Us as in everybody, not just some, humanity.
True, with
Good
humanity.
word.
Okay, with humanity. But really, 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 you know, in the Jewish nation. And guess who else? Guess who else? The Samaritans. How about that?
Mm.
Isn't that interesting?
Hey, can I throw a really weird monkey into the wrench? Monkey wrench into the
You tell
wrench,
someone
sorry.
me.
I'm kidding. I was noticing that there's a reference to Samaritan here, cross-reference
Mhm.
to Matthew 10,
Yeah.
where Jesus was sending out his disciples.
Yes.
And he says, do not go among the Gentiles or into any town of the Samaritans.
Mm-hmm.
Mm.
So how does that
Mm-hmm.
fit with this, or is it a rabbit trail that we don't want to go down?
Probably.
That's that.
It probably is, because it is a bit of a, for this class, is a bit of a rabbit trail,
Yeah.
because,
But at some point along the way,
Yeah.
Jesus decided that Samaritans were worth his time.
They can't,
Well,
Not-
they
they
may
can't
not have
deal
been
with
ready
Samaritans
yet.
at this point.
Yeah.
no,
exactly.
no. It's,
They may not have been ready yet.
there's all kinds of reasons why, and I think that's a
Yeah.
very real reason. Because look at their reaction when they come back also, right to that.
Yeah.
What are you doing, dude?
Yeah, talking to a Samaritan
What are
woman?
you doing?
Yeah.
But we see this as kind of the beginning of some
Baby steps.
messaging
Mhm.
that happens from Jesus about his heart for the Samaritans. Because later on, like in Acts, I included some Acts verses there in the midweek mailer, in case you didn't notice, where the Samaritans in Samaria are literally, intentionally mentioned in the early beginnings of the church. And the role that they played, and the role the region played, right? That, guess where the Christians in the Jerusalem area are mentioned in Acts as escaping to when they started getting persecuted heavily? Samaria. They went to Samaria.
So is she being grafted in just like we are?
Oh, man, Sue, come on. So, if you knew the gift of God and who it is that asks you for a drink, you would have asked him, not me, third person, right? So this is the puzzly, riddle-ish way of talking, right? If you had known who it is that who it is that you're talking to, and who it is that's asking you for water, if you knew who it was, really, 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 you'd be asking him for living water. See, all the interaction that came before this was all to set that up. How thirsty was he really? He was probably thirsty, right? He was probably thirsty. Yeah, it's a hot land, hot day, middle of the day, sitting there by a well. Hey, could you give me some water too? You could have given him some water, really. We talked about that in the last session. He's a full-grown man, healthy human being, a specimen of a guy. You could have found a way to get it.
But we all know you can't live without water.
Thank you. This is what's the even funner thing, right? Because he's human also, and he can't live without water, and so he relates on the human level with her that he needs water too. But he's using it as a setup.
Of what water you want? What water you seek?
It's a big, big, big theological setup. Right? And it's amazing. It's an amazing springboard setup statement. He doesn't even ask her a question. Jesus says, if you knew who I
Provocative.
am, if you knew who I actually am. And so this is a springboard statement into the rest of the conversation. Right? This is it. Not how many husbands she has. This is the springboard, right? So of course now he's speaking in riddles, right? Because what does she say? Sir.
How are you gonna get the water?
Yeah, she thinks she's talking about real water, real H2O, right? When we know in retrospect, understanding this story, that he's not talking about H2O. He's speaking figuratively of what actually really gives us life, living water.
The living nourishment for your soul.
Yeah, actual life. Not just water that will temporarily slake your thirst and keep you alive as a human body. If you knew who you're talking to, you'd ask him for living water. And I don't even have a bucket, as she says. Right.
But he came to the well and not like the
Yeah.
synagogue or someplace
No.
else. I mean, he's
No.
sitting at the well, so.
No, yeah. So it's all a big theological setup to plant a really big seed. Because he's going to leave. Not right that moment, as it turns out. He's actually going to stay. They invite him to stay. We're not even at that point yet. They invite him to stay. Sir, you have nothing to draw with, and the well is deep. Where can you get this living water? See, now he's got her.
Oh, 'cause,
Set the hook.
yeah. Go ahead.
Okay. Are you greater than our father Jacob? Okay, so this is a really important statement that she's bringing into this question, or the conversation. We kind of overlook it, okay? Because we've already saw in the story earlier on that this specific well is called Jacob's well. Well, they refer to it as Jacob's well. Okay. From extra biblical history, okay, outside the biblical history. Okay. But the Jews do too. The Jews know about the history of this town and the well. And Jacob, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Okay? So now, she's the first one that says something that is of a overtly religious nature. You notice that?
Yeah.
A woman, a Samaritan, by herself, talking to a Jewish guy that she doesn't know, total stranger, and she makes an appeal to our father Jacob. Our
They go back to the beginning.
Our father. Our father, your father, also.
Which we were all one. We were not separate by our own puristic ideas.
You're not greater than him, are you?
Can I throw something?
That's a great
out?
question.
Probably another monkey wrench.
Oh, what?
But the Jews and probably the Samaritans called living water, water that was flowing and coming out of the
Yeah,
ground
versus
naturally.
stagnant.
Which is literally,
So he calling this living water could have not it could have not immediately
Mhm.
created the impression in her mind that it's like something magical.
True.
But it's just
True.
not still water.
That's exactly right. In fact, this is not a well down that's going way down to the ground and finding the water
It's
table.
bubbling.
There's literally as an aquifer. It's a,
Occasionally,
there's a name for it.
Artesian?
Artesian?
Yeah, there's another term for this too, where it's spring water.
Right.
Okay, there's actually running water down in this
Right.
well. They know that, for a fact, but at least there was, and not really anymore, but, it wasn't just one of those get down below the water table and, take all this nasty water out. It was good water. Yeah, but that's a good observation, because, putting ourselves there, what would register on our minds when he said, you'd ask me for living water, or that person, this indirectly me, for living water. So, are you greater than our father Jacob, who gave us the well and drank from it himself? Look at that history, too.
Right.
I mean, just generations, and nobody even alive or who knew anybody that was ever alive knows Jacob.
And it's still producing water.
But this is still producing water, and how strongly the Jewish story prevails in who they are as a people, right? Whether they were Jewish or Samaritan. As did also his sons and his livestock. So that's a question mark.
Well, you have to remember, even if they're Samaritans, it came from Jews intermarrying.
Mhm.
That's what separated them. So there's Jews there. Their teaching is there. They know that history.
As we're going to see, we're out. This is that statement right there is her introduction. She's the one that does it into the continuation of this conversation that's going on, because it gets bigger.
But the real Jews kept on making these rules and stuff and being puristic to separate themselves from everybody else, because they were the chosen one.
Yeah. Yeah.
Long story
Yeah.
short.
Yeah. So he answers her. Everyone who drinks of this water in this well will be thirsty again. Yes?
Yes.
But whoever drinks the water I give will never thirst. Okay, there it is.
So that clarifies that her interpretation of
Mhm.
whatever living water might be.
Right.
That kind of clears it up right there.
Yeah. They will never thirst, ever. Indeed, the water I give them will become in them a spring of water welling up to eternal life. The woman welling up, see, spring of water welling up into eternal life. The supply is continuous also.
In them.
Which is-
an important part of that.
Yeah, in a person. Now, what could she have said before you look at what she said? What could she have said to this whole thing?
how could that be?
What are you talking about?
Are you a nut?
Yeah.
So what kind of water is this and how can I get this? Because that's what I want. I want something that would nourish me and continuously to provide for me.
So I don't know.
What is, I mean, normal water you just consume. This water is self-producing in you.
Mhm.
Yeah, how does water relate to eternal life?
Okay,
Can-
okay.
I
Now,
I would be.
She's obviously not getting it
I-
right yet.
thank
But
you,
she's
Sue.
trying
Yeah,
to
right, it's
fill it
easier
out.
to be more confused,
Yeah.
Yeah.
right, as Sue says, right? It's easier to be more confused now, because what is this guy even talking about? What is he getting at? What is he talking about? Because as of yet, up to this point in the story, they don't even know each other's names. They don't even know each other from Adam and Eve, you know? I mean, it's like they're just complete strangers. And if you walked up in downtown Seattle and had a conversation like this with somebody, which I have, remember the angel Archangel Michael that we ran into on downtown street one time decades ago?
Yeah. He told me my shirt was the color of heaven.
Yep. And so obviously, naturally, we got in a conversation with him because we thought maybe he really was.
You may entertain angels.
Right? No.
Mhm.
Great. So if you interject your own human nature into the Samaritan woman here, you can easily say, well, this guy's wacko, but she doesn't.
And isn't this in a period of, what I'm talking about? Prophets that, you know, like 400 years of drought of prophets have happened. Now
Yes.
Jesus is there
Yes.
and there's now a new
400
prophet.
silent years without prophets, yeah.
Well, she focuses in on not getting thirsty again and not having to draw water. So I'm not sure that, maybe she just didn't even hear the entire thing really clearly. She just heard that, hey, is there a way that I don't have to go draw water?
I know, right?
I'm on,
Which is not
you know,
realistic.
I'm-
Yeah,
I'm
now,
all
now
over
you're
it.
speaking my language
Yeah.
because I'm fed up with coming to this well all the time, every day.
Yeah.
By
You know,
myself.
and by myself and haul these big, huge containers of water back. You ever watch like newsreels and stuff of women in third world countries that still do this kind of
They do
thing?
it all the time.
Man, it's just
Little girls.
incredible work.
2 miles.
Incredible work. Just a little bit. You know, I used to, one of my gigs back in the 80s when I was young, yes, I was.
You were young in the 80s?
Yeah. Yeah, I was. I did security work for the Weyerhaeuser Company down in Longview. And so I got, in the 80s, those were sort of alive and kicking back then. Remember that our economy was in the tank. And in a town like Longview, which is a timber industry town, it was really in the tank. And so Weyerhaeuser was selling off some properties. And one of them was was a division that was off-site. Sawmill, planing mill, log yard, log pond, you know, a huge property. They closed up and put up for sale, equipment and everything.
Which required a lot of water, by the way.
That's where I'm going with this. Pond there. And so I ended up for 2.5 years. Took them that long to sell it in that economy. 2.5 years I spent on that property. It was like a vacation kind of, so it was really cold in the wintertime sometimes. Foot patrolling and mobile patrolling that property. During Monday through Friday. I had the cake shift. It was 24/7 coverage to watch this thing because Cowlitz County is redneck land. In fact, the winner of like two different times, there's a real thing, to me, Cracker. This isn't, yeah, it's a real thing. There's such a contest called the Miss Poor White Trash contest. And it's not even a demeaning thing, it's just a kind of a comedic, humorous kind of, but twice, 2 different winners have come out of Columbia, Washington, in Cowlitz County on the Columbia River. So that's the kind of nation. So I've literally sat up in the woods watching a derailed log train and lumber train coming down from Toutle overnight one night to make sure nobody came and started salvaging lumber off those cars.
But the whole point was to haul water to your pump.
Yes.
Get you on track.
Yes. Anyway, so anyway, this place needed security. That's the bottom line, right? You couldn't just lock up the gates and walk away and put a for sale sign on it, because there's a big investment going on in Weyerhaeuser's part. So they said, one of the things you have to do is you have to maintain the level of the log pond. That's one of your chores. So you keep an eye on the level of the log pond, because it just sinks and evaporates and everything, right? The property, not very far from the log pond, ran against a slough. You know, there's a lot of sloughs in the Longview area that dump into the river, the Columbia River and the Cowlitz River. Slough ran alongside the property, and there was a pump house there for the log pond. And so, like once a month, I would have to go down there and climb down in there, this platform above the pump, grab the 5-gallon plastic bucket that was on a rope, and toss it into the slough, scoop it full of water, 5-gallon bucket full of water, and hoist it up with a rope to prime the pump, okay, to get it going, so it could just start feeding the pond, right? And I was healthy enough, of course, to do it because I was doing it, you know. But it gives you, if you do that, if you do something like that, if you've ever done something like that, okay, then you start thinking about these women who do that. And not even go anywhere with it. You know, I've taken 5-gallon buckets of whatever, you know, in tandem places, you know, across job sites and stuff like that. But these women are hauling 5 gallons plus sometimes on their body a mile or more. Yeah, give them some respect. Anyway, so go call your husband and come back.
That's why that picture that you had up there before where she's dropped the water
Yeah.
bucket and running, and I'm like,
Yeah.
that was a lot of work just to get that water to there.
I know, right?
But that doesn't matter to her no more.
The picture tells kind of the story too. It's like, whoa, what he just said is crazy now, and we haven't even gotten to that. This has just gone from weird and insane to, oh man, oh man, oh man, oh man, oh man. Go call your husband and come back. Why? Why are you concerned about my husband, mister? I have no husband, she replies. Here it comes. You are right when you say you have no husband. In fact, you've had 5 husbands, and the man you now have is not your husband. What you just said is quite true.
Now, she has no idea where he came from. He could have been part of the town and never seen him, but stranger. But he knows about her. But there's a lot of people in town that probably know about her too.
Yep, they would. Okay, now let's recenter something too about this story, about the interactions here going on. If she's a woman of ill repute, you know, like a lot of Bible teachers teach that for centuries. If she's actually a woman of ill repute, factor that into this conversation. Okay? If she's just a woman who's sleeping around, if she's a prostitute, if she's an outcast, okay? If that's the position we're taking about the character of this woman, then consider that going forward into this conversation and all her actions. Is that what that kind of woman would actually be saying and doing? and to whom?
Well, every one of us is a sinner. Every one of us would want a Savior, I believe, if we understood. And I can see easily why she would.
Why she would personally,
Yes,
right?
yeah.
But that's not all she does though either, is it?
He runs back and tells the whole community.
Yeah,
Yeah.
she runs
And
back and tells
everybody.
the city, not a woman of ill repute who's a prostitute or whatever, to some, you know, outcast woman comes running back into the city to say, hey, come and listen to this guy, he just told me everything about me.
What are you talking about? Everybody knows about you.
But first, she has a theological discussion with him.
Yeah, that's
But
right.
she tells him also that
That's
he
right.
is
I
right.
mean, she
He's
doesn't
right.
just
I mean,
run.
she's
That's-
very
She goes,
upfront
wait a
with
minute,
See,
wait a
this is-
minute.
asking the questions.
What I love about
And
this
she's so
conversation.
She's bold. She
Yes.
wants to have a
See?
theological discussion with
I
this
know,
man.
that's the part of the thing, is that really a woman of ill repute having
Yeah.
this kind of
If she was
conversation? with
embarrassed by
somebody?
who she is, she could have lied.
But-
I know, it's just all lies.
But Jesus fed her with this water of life, and they're probably like, what?
So he's offering it,
Not yet, she hasn't.
he's
Trying
offering
to look at
it,
her husband.
but she's gotta have enough cred.
Well, when she runs back to the city, she has that information,
But
that's
she
what I'm
hasn't
saying.
run back to the city yet. She's
No.
having a theological
That's
discussion
correct.
next.
That's correct. But just commenting on that comment that, you know, she's not gonna go and share it with anybody if she doesn't have some kind of cred in town.
Right.
Well-
Some kind of cred, even if she's considered a wacko. But their response to her was not that she was wacko.
No. I can understand the correlation you're making,
Mm.
but, you know, when Jesus rose from the dead, and women came down and saw him, they ran back and told him instantly, and they didn't believe him.
Yep.
And but they did go back to check. And so it could be that, I would say that the time, you know, she says he's a prophet. Well, that would have to be proven, that's what Jesus tried to do. And,
Trying to do, because the only one that's hearing this is her,
yeah,
right? With the women that you're referencing in the end, they all knew each other. The
That's
male
true.
disciples and the female disciples all knew each other, and they all knew Jesus. Really, 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 right? She doesn't know him yet, really. She's going back into town where nobody's even seen him yet or heard him yet. So, yes, yes, I agree, Mark. In fact, that's one of the places that we're going with the conversation too, is that John is setting her in the middle of, not in the middle, but, in this gospel, in a really strong position. Because there's other women that are to kind of come up later on in the gospel that are also going to be women who go run and tell the men.
Like I said,
Two
I
different
think
places.
another important thing is that Jesus engaged her in conversation. He didn't treat her like
No.
she was not worth his
No, not at
time.
all.
So, I mean, Jesus elevated women
Yep.
everywhere he went.
Yeah.
Well,
He
there's-
elevated women's stature.
He really did.
Well,
There's
and
more.
there's something
Go ahead.
changing inside of her to me.
Yeah, that's what I'm,
Because
Yeah.
when I first
Yeah.
became a Christian, I was an adult. I didn't have credibility with everybody, but I wanted to share
Right.
what had
Yeah.
happened in my life
Oh,
in
sure.
that encounter.
Sure,
And
sure.
she's running to
Right.
tell him
Yeah.
with joy.
and there's more than just verbal language, there's body language, and I bet you she was screaming that out.
Right.
Yeah.
at the point of time in history here, people are looking for a prophet, they're looking for a Messiah.
They wanted
Yeah.
to get to that point.
You're right.
that
There-
We
like you
no
said, there's
longer
about 400
believe just
years of
because
drought
of what
of
you
prophecy.
said. So
Yeah,
that
yeah.
she planted
Yeah.
a seed in
So
them
now-
that they
so
were
now we're
like
gonna hit-
totally no.
Yeah.
But they said, but we want to see it for ourselves. So she wasn't totally discredited by her own people either.
Well, no. I'm not
But
saying that
they-
she was.
You know, basically her
She
two
actually
things, the
was.
prophet and living water, miracle.
Yeah,
Right.
yeah. But anyway, so go, oh, I'm sorry.
You know, the conversation about her being a woman of ill repute My head kind of went a different direction.
Yeah.
She had, she had, you know, 5 husbands.
Mhm.
I don't know if that means that she's really unlucky, but it certainly means that the 5 guys were unlucky. And the sixth guy is considering testing his luck.
Oh my goodness.
But, you know, that kind of answers the situation of her having credibility in her town. It could be a lot of sorrow, a lot of sympathy, a lot of,
Yeah.
Thank you.
you know,
Thank you. That's really the converse of using that little text there to prove that she is not a woman we want to hang with, right? But actually, that she has a history in this town with her people.
being very needy.
Yeah.
It doesn't say that she's a widow.
No, it
Does it
doesn't.
have to?
It doesn't have to, but it doesn't say that. But it's easy to believe, you know, this is not Bruce saying, it's scholars who understand the first century anthropology and history and everything like that that's going on, that, and besides the religious cultures, that 5 is extreme. 5 is extreme.
Especially
But-
since they don't live so long.
That's the whole thing, is that the men were usually older than the women when they were getting married. But then now she's going through husbands. Are they dying? Are they divorcing her? Et cetera, et cetera. But she doesn't have legal and economic means or power, okay, in their culture, like, you know, we have now, even. Not even close to what we have now, you know, as a woman, right? Men were the purveyors of all of that. And so, for survival purposes, there was nothing unusual about getting remarried in those times, right? Because you needed to have you have needs. And, you know, so, and we could go a long way even just with that thread, right? Doesn't mean that she was some kind of sinful woman. There are sinful women, quote unquote, that are mentioned in the Gospels. No, nothing's ever said outright in here, in this whole entire account, that she is a woman of low worth, that she's a woman that's looked down on by her culture or by her city or by her townfolk, or anything. Just that people are taking that little chunk right there, and the fact that she came at noon in the middle of the day, and they were the only ones there. Were they the only ones there?
Doesn't say.
It doesn't say. It does not say. But that's an assumption that we even can make, right? But it doesn't say. When did Rebecca go to the well in Genesis to get water, and she met somebody?
She had a flux.
She was watering her flocks. What time of day? The middle of the day, literally. It says in the middle of the day with her sisters, and she's not the only one there. Okay? So, to take the fact that she's there in the middle of the day, and then flesh out that she would go there instead of going in the morning, so she wouldn't interact with people because she was a woman of ill repute, it doesn't really hold a lot of water. Anyway, we're 5 minutes over. Let's go ahead and stand and get break. Thank you, guys. Father God, thanks for this story, and thanks for this woman. We're going to learn some really cool things also. We'll talk about her next week that are pretty amazing, the amazing story that goes on here, and the things that he's sharing with her, Lord, that are so pivotal in important to our faith that we know because of this conversation, Lord, in Jesus' name, amen.
Amen.
Thank you very much, you guys.